Hello and welcome to another conversation with Revel Coach. Alison, my sister, and I started this journey about 5 years ago, and every week we get a chance to meet somebody new. And just through pure curiosity and asking questions, we've learned so much over time. And today I'm really excited to have Corie Wightlin with us. So Corie, I'm going to introduce you, but I want to just share what I've picked up on your work is that you're great with time management, organization, prioritization, motivation challenges, and just all those types of things that can feel exhausting and overwhelming. And so her work that she does is she helps people discover why they are struggling and then support them to live, for individual solutions and to live a happier life. And I know there's so much more about your work that we're going to go into, but I'm really excited about this conversation because I have a lot of questions. So Corie, thank you for being
Yeah.
here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And I love how you said I'm good with that because I tend to not be good with all of those things, but I tend to support others in being really good with those things. And so I struggle every day, just like everyone else. So
Oh,
I appreciate that.
all right. Well, I like you more and more. So I'd love to just ask the first question, like tell us a little bit about your work and how you got into it.
Yeah, so I call myself an executive functioning coach, but it really is kind of a big umbrella. And I got into this work kind of haphazardly and a little accidentally. So I was a classroom teacher for a really, really long time, and I specialized in special ed kiddos, specifically kiddos on the autism spectrum and kiddos with ADHD. So I found that supporting those kids came with a different set of skills. And I also found that I needed to support their families as well. Then, fast forward to my own three children, and I have three neurodiverse children myself, all extremely different personalities, extremely different diagnoses. And so, navigating parenting them, realizing, oh, wow, nothing that worked for my first one is working for my second one. Or, the strategies and routines that we thought we had in place, then the third one came along, and all of a sudden, that all fell apart. So I realized, wow, we really aren't magic wand, one size fits all kind of brain, and we really need to figure out individualized and personalized solutions. So I left the classroom, got certified in mindfulness, became a mindfulness facilitator, was doing retreats, supporting schools, supporting students, kind of anyone who wanted me. Then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, retreats weren't that popular anymore, as you can imagine. And so I had been toying with the idea of doing executive functioning coaching. So I used that time, that pause that we all took, and I became certified as a ADHD executive functioning coach. And now I marry my education understanding, my mindfulness, because mindfulness is such an important part of building these skills. Because without awareness and regulation, we aren't able to put into place anything that we come up with. And my own parenting. And then I myself am neurodiverse. So what I have found and how I can show up for people, I think is kind of unique because I 100% get it. So I've been doing this particular work for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years now, and I love it. And I love working with families. I love working with kids. I love working with adults. And just, everyone is different and meeting them where they are and figuring out that magic box to open with them and support them in creating these systems.
That's so
So,
great. I just can only imagine how rewarding that is when you are helping a family or a child or just somebody to kind of navigate through. Because when you said like you're talking about your three children, and here you are, very knowledgeable, very experienced, and you recognize that, that what works for one doesn't work for the other. And too often we buy a book and we try to apply it on our children and it just doesn't land. And so I'd love to learn more about
right.
how you kind of work with a client, like say you work with somebody, how do you assess what could work with them? Like, how do you kind of get started with somebody? Um, I'll start with say like a middle schooler or somebody that's like, in the early education years.
Yeah. So with my middle school and high school kiddos, the first thing is buy-in, right? So I have to really meet them where they are, get to know what they like, get to know what they don't like. And, really with any age, the youngest client I have right now is 7. The oldest client I have right now is 70. So kind of all the whole gamut. is figuring out the very first thing is what is going to motivate them, right? So, especially in a neurodiverse brain, we have a lot less regulation with our dopamine and our serotonin. And so it can make prioritization, motivation, stick to itiveness really, really hard. So we have to balance and we have to ground in what is exciting for our brain and what's going to motivate our brain. So that's what I do first through questioning, through some tools I have, is figuring out, okay, what is exciting to you? What do you like? What do you not like? And then from there we go, and what does an ideal situation look like? So, I'm working with a middle schooler right now who is an advanced math, super bright kid, task paralysis every time he goes to do his math homework. It's just overwhelming. There's so much. He's in advanced math, so it's really hard. And so we talk about what's an ideal situation for that. And he said, I just want to sit down and be able to do it all at once. But my parents think I should chunk it. And my teacher said to just do 2 or 3 at a time and then come back to it. And that wasn't working for him because he would do 1 or 2. He would leave, he'd go play his video games. And then the last thing his brain wanted to do was come back. Right. So we worked on systems and strategies for him to time manage that, because that's a big chunk of time, for him to be able to sustain that attention and that focus for that amount of time, for him to be able to communicate to the adults in his life that are supporting him why this is important, what accountability he was going to have, right? Because those video games are really easy to get pulled into. So what did he need to not get distracted and pulled into the video games? And then nothing happens right away, right? Habits take time, new routines take time, new systems take time. So then we build in a system of accountability to help make this a habit and help reconnect those neurological connections in the brain that say, oh, okay, it's math time, I can do this. I've got this, and overcome that task paralysis. Does that answer that question? I feel like I went on a tangent on this kiddo, but
no, that's great. Hey, so Corie, you've mentioned neurodiversity a couple of times. Can you define what is neurodiversity and how prevalent is it with children, with adults? Does it change over time?
Yeah, so neurodiversity, it means that the brain is wired and processes information in a different way than what we call a neurotypical brain. So it means that there might be like chemical levels that are not balanced in the same way. So I talked about that dopamine. Dopamine is our motivation chemical in our brain. It gets us started, it gets us excited. There might be processing, so we might process a little slower, we might process a little quicker, we might have challenge with auditory processing when we hear things, or visual processing. And so in a short way, it just means that the brain learns and processes information in a different way. So some examples of neurodiversity are ADHD, autism spectrum, generalized anxiety disorder, dyslexia. Those are all kind of common. So we're hearing a lot about neurodiversity, I think, lately. And I think what is happening is you can have challenges at times with executive functioning in your life. So executive functioning challenges can come up when you're really anxious or nervous about something, when you're in a big life transition, when you are really tired. You're both parents. I think about, right, those first couple of years of having a kid, like my motivation, prioritization, time management. That was the last thing I cared about, right? So executive functioning challenges can come up in those times. And then I think sometimes we think maybe, do I have some sort of neurodiversity? However, neurodiversity is a medical diagnosed disorder, and that it never goes away. So we're born with it, right? It stays with us in our whole life. That doesn't mean that we can't create systems and tools and strategies and routines. That's all of what I help do to help us live a wonderful, easy, peaceful, calm life. But it is with us from birth throughout life, where executive functioning challenges do come up throughout our lives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are neurodiverse per se.
So do you feel that there's times that parents might jump to conclusions that they're neurodiverse, their children are neurodiverse, or is it really becomes, it's pretty like evidence-based on them? Or help me understand, like, because I definitely feel like there's some confusion of how people get diagnosed, and now people are claiming they're adult ADD. And, when I hear you saying it's like a diagnosis you're born with and you keep.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that's kind of a twofold question. So I'm going to answer both. The first one is, how are you diagnosed? You're diagnosed through a medical doctor, psychologist, someone with an MD, and through a series of questions, through a series of testing to really see how you're seeing the world, right? How you're taking in information, processing, and then putting that information back out. So we can have kids that are really hyper and running around. That doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD, right? We can have kids that are really spacey and kind of like in their own world, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD. So specifically for ADHD, the impacts from the disorder need to impact you in several different environments in order to have that diagnosis, right? So if your kid is at home and kind of defiant and doesn't want to do their chores and like would rather, play Switch, that doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD, right? If they're like that at home and at school and have emotional regulation challenges at baseball practice, it could be, right? But only a medical diagnosis can tell you that. And in terms of adult ADHD, what's really interesting is adult women are the highest diagnosed population right now. And why that is because we were so overlooked for so long. So for so long, ADHD, the H was the big one, right? The hyperactivity. Are you running around? Can you not sit still? Are you do you love doing sports? But when it comes to reading, forget about it. Yet women tend to show up as inattentive ADHD. So that's the spacey. That's the not being, organized. So those women were often told through their whole life, they're not living up to their potential. Or, oh, Sally, she's just always daydreaming. Or they, if you only tried a little bit harder. And so what I think is really sad is these women have carried around this kind of shame and sadness their whole lives. Like, I've been trying so hard and everyone keeps telling me to try harder. Like, why is, Sally down the block is fine. And yet I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. And so I do think that understanding the breadth and the diversity of neurodiversity is really important to know that it doesn't look the same in everyone, and that everyone shows up. Before we were kind of talking about dyslexia, right? And some kiddos are diagnosed at the age of 4 when they're starting to learn to read and they're writing and everything is flipped and they can't remember letters in the alphabet. Well, some people are diagnosed in their 40s or 50s because their child is now being diagnosed and they're like, oh, that's why I had to reread things 25 times. Or that's why when I went to write a paper, it took me 7 hours when it took my best friend 20 minutes. Oh, I get it. Right? So there's not a right or wrong time for a diagnosis, but it truly is. If you feel like you or your child does fall under that umbrella, the first thing is to seek a medical diagnosis. Yet, then my caveat is you can be an executive dysfunction and not be neurodiverse as well.
So let's think about Sally down the street.
Okay.
Because I feel like Sally could be me. So let's think about Sally down the street. And so there's times where, you feel like, oh my God, I'm trying so hard. And I feel like I just keep swinging and missing, or you just like, you can't get caught up. And so it's not necessarily, okay, let's say that it's executive functioning as opposed to like an ADHD, but or even if it is an ADHD without medication, I imagine that the strategies are the same to start to combat that, to try to figure out that. And you keep talking about systems. So creating those systems that work for you. I know Marcy and I trying to be, work together, and we're in different time zones and we have all these, complications. We've just like with this interview, we've just scheduled a time and we just stayed consistent. Like that's it. There's no exceptions. Very rarely, once in a while we will, but we try to have no exceptions because otherwise, like the time zones get screwed up. Everything just messes up. And it's just easier to be like, okay, we have a system and now we just stick with that. And I imagine that's the sort of thing you're talking about, like creating a routine, creating the habit, creating, those sort of the ideas like where where your triggers are, and then you can back off from whatever it is that's a potential problem.
And Alison,
100%.
Yeah, like I just want to say this is the $1 million question, and Corie, right to you. So, like, what are the strategies? Like, help us understand for ourselves or for our children.
Well, I think
notes,
my answer is going to be a little disappointing.
Got my pen.
But then I'll follow up. The answer is the strategies are what works for you. And so people come to me all the time, like, just tell me how to fix my kid or tell me how to fix myself. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. If it was that simple, you would have had a book that you could follow, right? So I think there are commonalities within the strategies. And Alison, just like you said, the first one is consistency, right? Whatever you decide works for you, you need to be consistent. We say it takes 21 days to build a habit. I think that is total not true. I think it takes up to 60 to 90 days to create a habit. 21 days, we might be feeling a little like, okay, I've got this. But how many times have you done a 30-day habit tracker and then you're like, oh, glad I don't have to do that meditation anymore, right? Got that out of the way. It takes a longer time for those connections to take place. So consistency is number one. The second one is motivation. What is going to be motivating for you? What's going to be exciting for you? What is going to get you over that hump when things get hard? The third one is, I call it the North Star, right? You have to have your own North Star. So so often when I work with like high schoolers and I meet with their parents, the North Star is grades. They need to have a 3.7 or, they need to do this. I meet with the kiddo and they're like, I don't really care about the grades. Okay, what's your North Star? I just really want my mom to stop nagging me. Okay, let's write that down, right? Because if we tell that kid, your North Star is a 3.7 and they don't really care about it, then when it gets tough or they're tired or their friend calls and they want to go out instead of do their homework, they're not going to be able to make that choice. That impulsivity is going to pull them away. And then the last one is accountability. So you need to build in accountability. And whenever I make up new systems with my clients, we always have accountability in there. That can be accountability from themselves. So timers on your phone, using Alexa, right? Writing it down. Oh, my Alexa just heard me. It just went ding. Writing it down in your calendar, writing it down on a sticky note that's in the middle of your computer. So as soon as you sit down, you see it, right? Or it can be accountability from others. So maybe you set up a body doubling session. So you do homework with someone else. Maybe you have mom or dad help you, remind you by, writing a note on your door, whatever it might be. But without accountability, when you are building up those skills and strategies, it's way too easy. So Alison, exactly what you just said with what you guys have done with this call is all of those things, right? You've done all of those things. And the accountabilities, you're holding each other accountable, right? If you book something at this time, you know that the other person is going to be disappointed and let down. You have consistency. You have your North Star of building this amazing community and offering information to other people and learning yourself, right? You have that stability of it and you have each other. So exactly what you just have done with this is what I do to help people figure it all out.
That is amazing. So with your clients, say take that middle schooler, how often are you meeting just with the client or just with the parent or with both? What's the experience? And I'm sure.
So I have a 12-week container. And the reason I asked for 12 weeks is it goes back to that, right? 30 days, 21 days is not enough. And we need consistency. So I asked for 12 weeks and we meet once a week for those 12 weeks. We start with a 90-minute intake session. So if I'm working with a family, like a middle schooler, a high schooler, then I ask that the caregivers or whoever is going to be supporting that kiddo also are on that 90-minute intake. And we get nitty gritty there. What is, what's motivating you? What is challenging for you? What has worked in the past? What have you tried that has just been a, flat on your face failure? And we figure out 3 really solid goals that we're going to work towards. So maybe it's prioritization when it comes to homework. Maybe it's emotional regulation in the evenings. Maybe it's a bedtime routine, whatever it might be. And then we spend the next 11 weeks working on building that toolbox that helps build towards those 3 goals. So within those next 11 weeks, it kind of depends on the family. So right now I have a high schooler who is just really having a lot of challenge, and we're just trying to get him to pass his classes right now. So I meet with him alone every other week, and then his parents with him every other week, because they really need to be part of this plan with him. I have a family that has 2 middle schoolers, and I'm just actually working with the parents right now because they feel like they need home systems. And then I have an 8th grader that does not want mom and dad involved at all. So I meet just with him, and if he feels comfortable and he gives me permission, I'll share with his family and his parents. But he's wanting to take the reins, and he's wanting to build these strategies on his own. And he's one of those that his North Star is to get mom off his back, right? So he needs to be doing it individually. So it really depends on that 90-minute session on how we will proceed going forward.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm so glad you shared the way you shared it so I can visualize, how it works. So I had an assumption preparing for this that it was slightly more how to make, this is probably the quintessential the parenting nano focus, but how to help a child with their brain study better to have better results at school. And what I'm hearing, it's definitely more of like full scope life, like responsibilities and habits and kind of living up to their own goals and things like that. So am I wrong? And do you still do the first part, the studying part, or is it still the life part?
Yes. So the studying part definitely comes into play. So if you have a kiddo who has a goal of, figuring out this whole school game and figuring out how to use their study time more efficiently, what works for their brain in studying, how to get their homework done in a way that is productive and not just like check off the box and do it. We work on those systems and strategies. I have a client later today, and we're working on note taking, because his note taking looks like he just has no clue, right? He opens it and it looks like it's in a different language, because when he's in class, the processing the information. I mean, think about how many executive functioning steps have to go in, right? You have to listen to the teacher, plus there's probably a slideshow going on that you have to read. Then you have to synthesize all that information in your brain, and then you have to get it out onto paper in a way that makes sense for you. That alone is enough to drive somebody with executive dysfunction to just give up, right? So he and I are working a lot on note taking and what works for him, and ways that he can bring awareness and intention in class that help him, right? So he's in high school, and he has a timer. He brings a sand timer to school, and he's like, I'm just doing it. And that helps him. When he sees it, it helps him, oh, okay, wait, am I focused, right? It helps him see the passage of time. So if he looks at it and the sand timer is almost done and he hasn't written anything down, he knows that he's missed like 5 minutes of notes, right? It helps him. Then he can flip it over. Okay, I've got this next 5 minutes. Would I have ever told a 16-year-old to use a sand timer? Probably not. But he knew he needed something, so we explored lots of different options. So it definitely is part of that. And I think of those as also life skills, right? Because I'm hoping this kiddo goes on to have a job, or goes on to want to fill out a job application, or be in a meeting. Maybe he's a parent volunteer and is in a meeting with other parents. And I want him to be able to know what works for his brain, to take in all the information around him. And I do know that because I get this like beautiful, I call it like the ghost of, future, like in the Christmas Carol, because I do work with adults, right? I have a client right now who is an engineer at Google, and he's like, I go into meetings and I'm like, dude, I have no idea what these people are saying. So we're working on, and he's a brilliant, really cool, awesome dude, right? But he never learned those skills in high school, right? He was so smart and so capable that he was able to kind of mask and slide through. So I do think of, even though we're working on, okay, studying for this math test that's next week, or studying for your AP, history exam or whatever it might be, I do think of it, and I do talk to kids about, okay, this isn't just for this test though, right? We're building this toolbox that I want you to have for the rest of your life, that you know what works for your brain and that you feel empowered, whatever situation you decide to go into.
Wow, Corie, this has been such a great conversation. I want to have one last final question before we sign off. So my kids are in their 20s, and I feel like talking to you and listening to what you've had to say, and as well witnessing the education system, that it used to always be like children. I always framed it as children had to walk through the front door, and if they didn't walk through that front door and sit in the chair the proper way, that they would get left behind. And I feel like we've been adjusting and navigating this sort of what's called the new normal, where we're allowing children to come in whatever door they can come into. Do you find that we're shifting that way?
That's a really good question. I think we are, but I don't know, because I also do, we talked about this a little bit earlier, right, Alison? I also do educational consulting. So I go into schools. So I'm in schools in many, many districts in different states. So I think that we are trying, and we're trying to get there. However, policy and procedures are not keeping up. So I do think it's really, really essential for parents to feel educated and empowered to advocate for their student and advocate for their child in education. And I am a big proponent that all students deserve to have access to the same curriculum and the same expectations as every other student. But exactly, I love how you said that, Alison, but exactly, they should be able to do it in a way that they're going to be successful. Because I think, like, in the grand scheme of our global community, right, that is how we're going to create successful citizens, right? It's not just kind of following along. It's, how do I know I can show up as the best person I can in this room so I feel confident and comfortable sharing my thoughts, sharing my feelings, sharing my understanding. So yes and no, I do think so, but I do think the policies and procedures are light years behind, that we're still, I think about my dad has severe ADHD, and he spent his entire elementary school in the coat room. He was always in trouble in the coat room, ate everyone's lunch, got in more trouble, right? He was just that kid. And then I think about my youngest, who just left elementary school. And unfortunately, it wasn't much different, right? There wasn't a coat room, but it was a lot of like, oh, so smart yet can't do it. Like, oh, always seems to be messing around, always seems to be frustrated, always. So I think that we've come a little bit of ways, but I still think we do have some ways to go. And so that's part of what I love doing, is educating and supporting parents and advocating for their kids so that their kids can be really what we all want, right? Happy kids at school. We really just want happy, comfortable, confident kids at school.
Yeah, that no more. We don't want them spending the time. I will not talk in class. Writing that 2,000 times,
Exactly.
which I did spend. I think I probably wrote that more than anything in my entire junior high career. So, Corie Wightlin, thank you so much for stopping by. We are so glad you've been here. How can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about your programs?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So I have a very, very active Instagram. They can follow me at Wightlin Coaching Services, or check out my website, wightlin.coachingservices.com. Send me a DM. I would love, love, love to talk to anybody about supporting them. Like I said, I support little kiddos all the way through adults, and It's something that I find to be really exciting. So I would love to talk to anybody about how we can navigate this together.
That is great. Well, I definitely will be following up myself because I'm excited. Just the work you're doing is so great. And this is one of those times where I was like, cut it off at 30 minutes. But this has been a great conversation. And thank you so much for your time. And it's great to see you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I loved it. Thank you.
Revel Coach is a collaborative platform that builds leadership programs for entrepreneurs, coaches, executives, and authors. For more information, visit us at revelcoach.com and follow us on LinkedIn to never miss an update.